15th October 1942. Mid-Atlantic air gap, 02.11 hours. The ocean was a black, heaving plain, moonless, wind-streaked, and cold enough to bite through wool and leather. On the bridge of U-553, Oberleutnant zur See Karl Thurman scanned the horizon, goggles pressed to his eyes, waves slapping the bow with dull metallic echoes. The diesel engines throbbed beneath him, their steady vibration running up through the deck plates and into his boots. To a U-boat commander in 1942, this darkness was sanctuary. The surface at night was where a submarine was supposed to be invincible. For 2 years, Admiral Karl Donitz's wolf packs had feasted on Allied convoys under cover of darkness, slipping through the gaps in escort screens, striking with torpedoes, and vanishing before the enemy knew what had happened. At night, on the surface, a U-boat could make 17 knots, outrunning most escorts, spotting targets first, and positioning itself like a predator stalking blind prey. Every submariner knew the gospel. On the surface at night, we are the hunters. But beneath the confidence, tension coiled like a spring. Allied radar sets, still primitive, still unreliable, were rumored to be getting better. There were whispers from boats that didn't return, rumors that the British had found a new way to see in the dark. Dönitz dismissed the claims as excuses from poor captains. "The enemy cannot see you at night," he insisted. "They are guessing." Yet something had shifted in the Atlantic. Convoys were arriving with fewer losses. Boats were going missing without sending a single radio message. Patrol zones once rich with targets had become eerily empty, as if the ocean itself were warning the U-boats away. Still, for men like Thurman, doctrine ruled the night. He stood confidently on the conning tower, scanning for the glow of a ship's funnel or the pale shape of a bow wave. Below him, his watch crew shivered, but trusted the darkness. Trust was everything in the U-boat arm. Trust in tactics, in invisibility, in the idea that the ocean could hide them forever. Then came the sound no U-boat officer expected in the empty mid-Atlantic, a distant engine drone. Thurman stiffened. An aircraft? Here, that was impossible. The mid-ocean air gap was supposed to be beyond Allied reach. He swept the skies, nothing but stars. The sound grew louder. Perhaps a flying boat far to the south, his navigator muttered. But the horizon stayed empty. Seconds stretched. The drone became a growl. Thurman's heart hammered. Something was out there. Something close. Yet no silhouettes appeared, no navigation lights, no moonlit wings. Only noise. He shouted below, "Alarm! Dive! Dive!" But the engines groaned as the boat hesitated. Surfaced speed was great, but diving took long, agonizing seconds. The bridge crew scrambled down the hatch. The Atlantic wind roared. Water poured in. And then, the night exploded. A blinding white glare, brighter than a searchlight, brighter than day, ripped through the darkness from above. It was as if the sun had been switched on over the ocean. The men screamed and shielded their eyes. A voice from below choked out the only word that made sense. Leigh Light. Then came the depth charges. The ocean heaved as the explosions tore water into towering columns. Metal shrieked. The boat rolled violently. And for the first time, Karl Thurman understood. The Allies could see them at night. They could see everything. The explosion of Allied radar capability had not been a rumor. It was real. And it was hunting them. Across the Atlantic, in Berlin, Dönitz continued to insist the losses were coincidence. He blamed luck, weather, inexperienced captains, anything except Allied technological superiority. Doctrine, he insisted, must hold. U-boats, he would say again and again, are safest on the surface at night. But in the black waters of the mid-Atlantic, every surviving U-boat captain felt the truth. Something invisible had found them. Something that didn't need moonlight. Something that didn't need to see them with human eyes at all. And as WWII slipped beneath the waves, damaged, rattled, half-blinded from the sudden light, her commander realized the mathematics of war had shifted. The Atlantic had turned from hunting ground to trap. Because Allied aircraft weren't guessing, they knew exactly where the U-boats were. The shock that rippled through Carl Thurman's crew in the mid-Atlantic was not the result of luck, nor of supernatural Allied eyesight. It was the product of a chain of innovators, technicians, and analysts scattered across Britain's coastal airfields. Men and women who understood what Donitz refused to see. The ocean at night was no longer a shield. Technology had changed the nature of darkness itself. The breakthrough began months earlier, not on a ship or inside a submarine, but inside the cluttered workshops of the Telecommunications Research Establishment, TRE, at Worth Matravers. Here, British physicists and engineers labored quietly under a simple, urgent mandate: find the U-boats before they strike. The Royal Air Force Coastal Command had suffered brutal losses in the early years of the Battle of the Atlantic. Aircraft often spotted U-boats only moments before sunrise, when the first light revealed a conning tower or periscope. Even then, U-boats dove before airplanes could attack. Radar existed, but early sets were weak, heavy, and limited. Worse, they required long wavelengths, around 1.5 meters, which bounced erratically off waves, masking submarines entirely. But in late 1941, engineers at TRE introduced a radical improvement: ASV Mk2 radar, using a shorter 176 MHz wavelength. Though still crude by later standards, this new system possessed two crucial advantages. First, it could detect a surfaced U-boat at night at distances of 8 to 10 miles. Second, it could be installed on aircraft capable of patrolling the North Atlantic for long hours. The U-boats had no idea. But even with improved radar, British air crews faced a deadly paradox. Radar brought them close. But when an aircraft switched on its landing lights or dropped flares to aim the attack, the submarine saw it instantly and had time to crash dive. Night after night, pilots were forced to watch radar contacts dissolve into fading blips as U-boats slipped beneath the waves. The solution came not from a strategist or commander, but from a restless young officer of Coastal Command. Wing Commander Humphrey de Verde Leigh. He was not a radar physicist nor a famous inventor, just a man who hated losing. Leigh believed something simple yet revolutionary. If aircraft had a powerful searchlight aligned with their radar approach axis, they could illuminate U-boats only when they were already too close to escape. He was right. But initially, nobody listened. Senior officers questioned the practicality, the safety, the weight, the engineering complexity. Some doubted pilots would be able to handle the sudden brightness. Others dismissed it as a distraction from more serious radar work. Leigh pushed anyway. He sketched designs. He met with engineers. He pressed commanders. He insisted a searchlight could change the entire war at sea. Finally, in defiance of bureaucracy, Leigh and a handful of engineers built a prototype in secrecy. They installed it on a Wellington bomber without approval. The first night test was astonishing. At 1,000 feet, the light washed the ocean in a blinding circle hundreds of meters wide, white, sharp, and unmistakable. Any U-boat caught in that cone would have no chance to dive before bombs or depth charges fell. By mid-1942, the Leigh Light entered operational service, and the German crews still knew nothing. Meanwhile, the Allies tightened the net further. American Catalina flying boats, British Wellingtons, and later the famous Liberators began patrolling deeper into the Atlantic, using ASV radar to hunt U-boats long before dawn. With long-range aircraft finally closing the mid-Atlantic air gap, the submariners lost the one advantage they trusted most: the ocean's vast emptiness. Yet inside U-boat headquarters in Lorient and Kernaville, the German command resisted the truth. B-Dienst intercepts and Enigma decrypts revealed that Allied aircraft were striking at impossible distances, and U-boat officers reported being surprised at night again and again. Still, Dönitz clung to doctrine. When commanders claimed they were attacked without warning, he insisted they were mistaken. But Allied radar operators were growing more confident every week. They knew how a U-boat's conning tower looked on a radar screen: small, sharp, and unmistakable. They knew how a snorkel or wake altered the signature. And once a contact appeared, the aircraft descended silently, throttled back, unseen and unheard. Only when the aircraft was seconds away did the pilot bark the command, "Light on!" The ocean erupted in white. Radar had found the target. The Leigh Light delivered the kill. What German submariners once believed was sanctuary had become a spotlighted stage. And the hunters, now exposed, were the ones being watched. And as U-boats across the Atlantic reported sudden encounters with aircraft that should not have been there, panic seeped into the ranks. Something had changed in the darkness. Something the old tactics no longer escaped. Something the commanders on land refused to admit until it was too late. The first true breakthrough, when radar and the Leigh Light fully revealed their terrifying synergy, came on a cold, moonless night in early 1943. Dozens of U-boats were patrolling the North Atlantic, stretched between Greenland and Ireland, relying on the same tactic they had trusted for years: surface fast, charge the batteries, attack under darkness, and vanish before Allied escorts could respond. But what none of them knew was that the Allies had turned the ocean into a vast, invisible web, and every surfaced U-boat was now a glowing beacon on an ASV radar screen. The moment that shattered the doctrine came on 8th of February 1943, when a Royal Air Force Wellington of 179 Squadron flew a solitary patrol southwest of Ireland. The crew, veterans of the grinding, thankless work of anti-submarine patrol, were used to long hours of black waves and empty radar screens. But that night, the operator suddenly stiffened over his glowing cathode tube. "Contact, range 9 miles, bearing green 20. The pilot, Flight Lieutenant Bill Wills, leaned over his shoulder. There it was, a small, steady blip. Not a wave return, not weather. Something solid moving slowly, a surfaced U-boat. The aircraft descended silently. No flares, no drifting lights. No warning. Radar led them in, tightening the circle until the operator whispered the words the crew had waited months to hear. "Target dead ahead, holding steady." The U-boat below, later identified as U-265, plowed calmly through the dark swells, its bridge watch oblivious to the danger above. The radar gave the Wellington a perfect approach. Down moon, silent, unseen. The pilot throttled back to reduce noise. The ocean blurred beneath them. 1 minute to contact. 30 seconds. Then the order came, sharp and electric. "Light on!" A brilliant white sun exploded over the water. The Leigh Light ignited, cutting through the night like a blade. The U-boat's conning tower glowed stark and white. Crew stunned, arms raised to shield their eyes. The boat turned frantically, helmsman spinning the wheel as officers shrieked for an emergency dive. Wills lined up the attack run. Depth charges tumbled into the circle of white. A heartbeat later, the ocean erupted in geysers. 1, 2, 3, 4 blossoms of water slammed the U-boat into a death roll. Metal groaned. A fiery plume tore through the night as the submarine broke apart. U-265 was gone. Back at the station, the crew reported the kill with a mixture of disbelief and grim satisfaction. Months of failure had turned, in a single flash of white, into something new. A successful, clean strike in total darkness. And this was only the beginning. What the U-boat captains experienced was far worse. Reports from survivors revealed panic rarely seen in the stoic Kriegsmarine journals. One submarine commander wrote in his war diary, "They appeared from nowhere. Their light turned night to day. Our tactics have collapsed." Another reported, "We cannot escape them. The aircraft know where we are. We must find a countermeasure or we will all die." Dönitz faced a crisis he could no longer deny. U-boats were being attacked at ranges previously considered impossible. Losses mounted, and the explanation was undeniable. Allied aircraft were not stumbling upon submarines, they were finding them deliberately. But the doctrine clashed with reality. Dönitz insisted that night surface operations continued to be the best option, arguing that diving made the boat slow, blind, and vulnerable. He urged commanders to trust experience, trust training, trust the mathematics of wolf-pack warfare. Yet every U-boat captain knew the truth. The very tactic that had made the U-boat deadly was now getting them killed. The arguments inside the Kriegsmarine command rooms grew heated. Senior officers clung to the old doctrine. Younger captains, their boats battered by unseen enemies, urged immediate tactical change. But change came slowly, and the ocean showed no mercy. Another breakthrough came in March 1943, when new VLR Liberators, very long-range bombers, tightened the last gap in the Atlantic. With both radar and Leigh Light, they patrolled regions where U-boats once operated with impunity. On one night alone, multiple U-boats reported being suddenly illuminated by the blinding white light. One captain dove so quickly, his bridge crew was swept into the sea. Another boat, U-632, reported an attack without warning from an aircraft we did not hear or see. Minutes later, she was hit. The cumulative effect was devastating. The hunters could no longer trust the darkness. The ocean, once an ally, had turned on them. The mathematics of war had flipped. Surfacing meant death. Charging batteries meant death. Attacking at night meant death. And as April 1943 approached, the month historians would later call the beginning of the end for the U-boat war, the Germans faced a decision that would determine the fate of the entire Atlantic campaign. Do they cling to the old doctrine, or accept that Allied technology had rendered their tactics obsolete? By April of 1943, the U-boat arm stood at the edge of a precipice. The once fearsome wolf packs that had terrorized the Atlantic were now bleeding out in the darkness. Night surfacing, the tactic that defined the early years of the Battle of the Atlantic, was no longer a weapon. It was a death sentence. Radar-directed aircraft ranged farther and stayed aloft longer, and the blinding Leigh Light continued to tear open the shroud of blackness. Yet the decisive moment, the undeniable breaking point, came in May 1943, a month the German Navy would remember as Der Schwarze Mai, Black May. The shift from attrition to collapse began with convoy on 202 SC-129, a combined eastbound-westbound escort operation that unfolded under newly coordinated Allied tactics. For the first time, the Allies synchronized radar-equipped aircraft, long-range Liberators, surface escorts with HFDF, Huff-Duff, radio triangulation, and the lethal Leigh Light to counter every stage of the U-boat attack cycle. When Wolfpack Amsel converged on the convoys, U-boat commanders expected the usual pattern. shadow the columns from a distance, call in reinforcements, and mount a night surface attack. But this time, the ocean struck back. On 4 May 1943, a B-24 Liberator of 86 Squadron detected U-638 on ASV radar at 10 miles. The radar operator recognized the telltale intermittent return of a submarine wake. Small, steady, metallic. The commander dove through cloud cover, engines throttled back, invisible in the moonless night. The radar return sharpened. Target locked, closing. The Liberator dropped to attack height. The U-boat never saw them. The Leigh Light ignited at 400 meters. The white beam lit the conning tower so abruptly that German lookouts screamed and ducked. Blinded, the boat crash-dived, but too late. Depth charges hammered the submarine, rolling her over. U-638 broke apart and vanished into the black water. Hours later, another aircraft caught U-531 in the same manner. Then U-125. Then U-192. By dawn, the wolf pack was in disarray. And by the end of the operation, Amsel had lost 4 submarines outright, with no ships sunk in return. Dönitz was forced to acknowledge what he had denied for months. The Allies could see in the dark. But the catastrophe was only beginning. The next blow fell with Convoy Owens 5. A clash of brutal ferocity fought across 7 days and nights in early May. Nearly 40 U-boats attempted to encircle the slow-moving ships, believing they had rediscovered an opportunity. But now, aircraft from both Greenland and Northern Ireland patrolled the ocean above the convoy. And every surfaced submarine, no matter how careful, was a glowing point on an ASV radar screen. U-boat attacks that once took place with surgical timing now dissolved into chaos. As soon as one surfaced to shadow the convoy, a Liberator descended from the darkness. As soon as one maneuvered for a torpedo shot, escorts equipped with improved radar and HFDF found them. And when a wolf pack gathered to strike in force, multiple aircraft coordinated attacks in a devastating series of radar-driven ambushes. The Leigh Light became, to U-boat sailors, a symbol of doom. Survivors described it as the light of death, a second sun, the eye that sees everything. One German officer later recalled, "When the light struck us, men screamed. There was no escape, no tactic, no seamanship, only terror." The statistics were unforgiving. Between 29 April and 6 May, 6 U-boats were destroyed outright. 7 more were severely damaged and forced to return to base. Not a single ship in ONS-5 was sunk after the first 48 hours. The wolf pack had become a slaughtered pack. By the middle of the month, reports flowed into Lorient and Kerneval. U-boats were being attacked faster than they could dive. Convoys were arriving more safely. Patrol zones once rich with targets now yielded only danger. German morale plummeted. Officers who once boasted about Atlantic tonnage now spoke quietly about the hopelessness of surviving a single patrol. And finally, on 24th May, 1943, Dönitz issued the admission that marked the turning point of the entire campaign. Withdraw the U-boats from the North Atlantic. The order was unprecedented. It conceded that the U-boat force, his life's work, the weapon he believed would strangle Britain, was now suffering unsustainable losses. In May alone, 41 U-boats were destroyed. More than 25% of the entire operational fleet. The highest monthly loss in the history of the U-boat arm. It was the end of the Wolfpack era. The cause was not a single Allied ship, nor any single escort group. It was the system: aircraft, radar, radio triangulation, code breaking, long-range patrols, and above all, the weapon the Germans never believed possible. A searchlight that illuminated submarines the moment radar said they were there. Night no longer belonged to the U-boats. Darkness no longer protected them, and the Atlantic, once their hunting ground, had become their graveyard. The order to withdraw U-boats from the North Atlantic in late May 1943 was more than an operational pause. It marked the irreversible collapse of Germany's most ambitious naval weapon. The wolf packs never returned to their former strength. New boats were commissioned, new tactics attempted, and new countermeasures rushed into production. But the sea had changed. Technology had tipped the balance, and the era of the invisible submarine was over. In the aftermath of Black May, the Kriegsmarine scrambled to understand how the Allies had pierced the darkness so completely. German technicians discovered that the British ASV Magnesecu radar worked on a wavelength the U-boat's radar detectors, METOX receivers, could not detect. The METOX could sense the longer wavelength radar of earlier years, but ASV Magnesecu operated too fast and too quietly, rendering the submarines blind to its approach. Radio reports from surviving captains painted a consistent picture. The aircraft found them long before they ever heard engines or saw silhouettes. In desperation, the Germans introduced the Naxos radar detector late in 1943. It alertly picked up the 176 MHz radar frequencies used by the Allies. But radar technology evolves with a ruthlessness few weapons can match. The British immediately shifted to the centimetric radar, powered by the cavity magnetron, which Naxos could not detect. Coastal commands, Liberators, Wellingtons, and Catalinas now saw U-boats at ranges and precision unmatched anywhere else in the war. The sea, from a technological perspective, became transparent. Even the vaunted German-type Winterraum electro-boot, conceived as a revolutionary underwater predator, arrived too late and in too few numbers to matter. The Allies had turned the Atlantic into a sensor-ridden battle space, in which submarines were always seen first and had no meaningful window to counterattack. But the real transformation was not just technological. It was doctrinal. Before 1943, the U-boat war had shaped Allied strategy. Convoys zigzagged, escorts hurried between ports, and intelligence teams fought desperately to keep supply lines open. Britain's survival depended on the flow of fuel, food, munitions, and raw materials from across the ocean. Every freighter sunk had been a strategic victory for Germany. Every convoy that made it through was one step closer to turning the tide of war. After the radar Leigh Light synergy proved unstoppable, the pattern reversed. The Atlantic became a place where the Allies dictated the terms. U-boats could no longer patrol freely. They could no longer shadow convoys at night. They could not surface without risk of immediate detection. Even snorkeling during daylight carried danger, as improved radar learned to pick out the faint mast-like signature. In short, the U-boat became a hunted species, and with the collapse of the U-boat threat, the consequences rippled across the entire Allied war effort. The safe Atlantic supply line enabled the build-up for Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, the movement of millions of tons of American equipment into Britain, the arrival of the Sherman tank, the Liberty ship, the B-17, and P-47 in massive numbers. The logistical foundation for Operation Overlord in June 1944. Without radar supremacy, without long-range aircraft, without the Leigh Light, and without cracking the Enigma traffic that guided wolf packs. None of this could have happened. The liberation of Europe depended on the ocean. And the ocean had been won through electromagnetic science, engineering persistence, and thousands of hours of perilous night, flying by Coastal Command and U.S. Navy crews. After the war, U-boat veterans spoke candidly about the moment everything changed. Many described the sudden visibility at night as unnatural, the end of hope, or the light that ended us. The Leigh Light, once dismissed by bureaucrats, became one of the most feared inventions of the war. Radar operators who once wrestled with crude cathode tubes became some of the most valued specialists in anti-submarine warfare. In the grand sweep of military history, the 1943 Atlantic turning point marked the dawn of information warfare. The first time that a battle was decisively won, not through armor, firepower, or manpower, but through the ability to sense, detect, and target the enemy before they could react. It transformed naval doctrine permanently. By the 1950s, every major navy adopted radar as the primary sensor, with submarine warfare pivoting towards stealth, electronic countermeasures, and guided torpedoes. But the core lesson remained the same. Control the invisible domain, and you control the battle. And that transformation began in a place few had imagined, a workshop in southern England where engineers refused to accept defeat, and a single officer insisted the night could be lit at the very moment radar found the enemy. The U-boats believed the Atlantic's darkness protected them. They believed no aircraft could see a conning tower in a moonless void. They believed their speed on the surface made them unstoppable. They were wrong, because the moment the Leigh Light burst on and the ocean turned white as day, they realized the truth. The Allies could see everything. And the night's surface war, once the pride of the Kriegsmarine, ended in a flash as bright as a second sunrise. If you enjoyed this deep dive into forgotten WWII technology and want more long-form historical investigations, stories where one invention changes the fate of an entire front, make sure to like, subscribe, and tell us which battlefield innovation you want uncovered next.